Hey there everybody. Microsoft Flight Simulator is a fun game with unique landing challenges, some of which are pretty difficult. Now if you're new to the game or aviation in general, you might even find yourself struggling at times to fly a smooth approach to landing. Heck, worse, you might find yourself in a situation where you're about to fly into the mountainside and wondering why the f*** you can't get any higher. If this pertains to you and you found yourself upside down on the side of the mountain, then stick around for some tips on flying a better approach and nailing your landings. We're going to talk about energy management and approach. Greetings everyone. Now I want to preface this by saying welcome to the channel. If you're new here, this is primarily a channel I use to document my journey through aviation training and sharing weather information with others. However, I haven't had the chance to fly recently due to preparing for a move and some weather cancellations, but I decided I'd make some flight sim focused videos instead. Now I do want to say that I am a real world pilot, however this is not to be used as a substitute for real world instruction and should be taken for entertainment purposes only. However, I do want this to be aimed towards beginners or newcomers to the sim and kind of help folks fly more realistically as well as really nail those landings. To do so, I'm going to draw from my real world experience and hopefully that will get us to where we want to be. In this video, we're going to be flying from Shreveport Regional Airport in the Cessna 172S the steam gauge version of the 172S that comes with the Deluxe bundle. Wow, I can't speak. A lot of what we talk about in this video can effectively be universally applied to any other plane, but I highly recommend beginning with the 152 or 172S just because of their simplicity. Alright, so we're loaded up here and essentially ready to go. What we're really going to focus on here is how to manage our energy by manipulating our power and pitch to maintain the proper airspeed and glide profile we want for a stable descent and landing. This is going to vary by aircraft, but in the 172S we're going to want to descend on the downwind at about 80 knots, slowing to 75 knots on our base and 70 knots on final. As we do, we're going to add flaps to help increase our rate of descent without picking up additional airspeed. We'll fly a left-hand traffic pattern around runway 32 as shown here, and our top altitude after takeoff will be about 1,200 or 1,300 feet. Now if you spawn on the runway, the game will put you in the takeoff configuration with engines and lights on and everything. In the 172S, it spawns us with 10 degrees of flaps, but we're not going to use that because we're going to do a normal takeoff without flaps instead. But you're not here to learn how to take off, you're here to learn how to manage your descent and landing, so I'll meet you on the downwind leg of the traffic pattern. Alright, so hopefully now you're flying straight and level, about 1,200, 1,300 feet, and pull the power back if you need to, whatever you need to do to maintain level flight. Now before we start to descend here, one thing you want to keep in mind is you're flying VFR, so you want to keep looking at the airport. Now, I'm using Track IR, which allows me to pan around pretty frequently here. It makes it very easy, and I highly recommend it if you don't have it already. But you can custom map some keybinds to help, quickly look to the left or whatever. Whatever you need to do, you want to, look around. We're going to maintain this speed. I'm flying about 90 knots. We're going to maintain this speed and power setting and maintain level flight until we get a beam the numbers here, which we're about to get here. So in a moment, we're going to pull the power back to 17, 1600, 1500 RPM, whatever you need to initiate a descent. Alright, so I'm beam the numbers here, and if you look at the tachometer, I'm decreasing the RPM to about 1500 RPM. And as I do, the nose is going to lower. Now, we're going to keep looking at that runway. We want to, keep looking at the runway, make sure that we're descending as we need to. And I'm going to put the first notch of flaps down. Flaps 10 in the 172S, below 110 knots, you can put flaps to 10. That's going to help us increase our rate of descent. I'm going to increase my power a little bit here just to maintain, and notice my airspeed, by the way. I'm maintaining 80 knots. And the way that we do that is to pitch down. We pitch the nose down to increase the airspeed. We pitch the nose up to slow the airspeed down. So as I turn here, I add flaps 20, and I'm going to be maintaining 75 knots. Now you notice I pitch up to maintain 75 knots. I'm looking at the runway, making sure that I'm high enough, make sure I'm not too low, not too high. Down the nose. That's going to increase the airspeed. So I'm maintaining 75 knots. As it gets closer to 80 knots, I pull the nose up to slow down to 75 knots. So we maintain the airspeed here. Again, I demonstrate, watch the airspeed increase as I push that nose down. Make sure there's no aircrafts coming from final. Go to flaps 30. And now we're going to aim for 70 knots. Now if you find yourself too high, you need to pull your RPMs back. You need to pull that throttle out just a little bit. Again, reference your airspeed indicator. Right now we're flying about 70 knots even, and we want to get on center line here. It's all about being stable, so we want to be on center line, and we want to be descending at a constant sink rate. Now, one of the things you want to do is see what your aiming point is. You can zoom in on the screen to figure out what your aiming point is. The aiming point is going to be whatever is in your field of view that's not moving. That's what you're traveling at. Now, if I zoom in here, looks like our aiming point's just pretty close to the threshold, which is fine in the Cessna 172. It just depends on where you want to touch down. Really, we just want to get used to landing, period. So this is a good touchdown, or this is a good aiming point. You see, it's just right on that threshold. So I'm going to keep my power in and maintain 70 knots. Now, as we get closer to the threshold, we're going to go power to idle, and we're going to round out, and we're going to imagine that we're trying not to land. So I'm going to pull the nose up, and I'm going to keep pulling the nose up. And as our airspeed slows, the plane's going to want to drop, and we're going to counter that by pulling up more, and there we go. So a nice soft landing, and maintain center line, put our flaps up, and then we'll go around again. Put the flaps up, and then go full power for the next one. Okay, so if you made it this far, you've completed your first touch and go. We're approaching the point that we're going to top of our descent, really. So as we get to beam the numbers here, we're going to pull our power back. I'm showing you my tachometer here. I'm slowing it down to about 1500 RPM, and we're going to let that airspeed slow to about 80 knots. I'm going to pitch the nose over. All right, so set that RPM to about 1600, and then put the nose down to maintain 80 knots. Below 110 knots, you can go flaps 10. So you want to pull the power and put those flaps to 10 immediately. And then you're just going to maintain 80 knots on your downwind descent. At about 1,000 feet at this airport, you're going to make that left-hand turn. And we're going to, if you're below 85 knots, put flaps to 20 and slow the plane to 75 knots. When you extend the flaps to 20, the plane should slow on its own. I mean, you're increasing the drag, so it's naturally going to slow. And then we're going to maintain 75 knots with our pitch. At the same time, you want to adjust your power to increase or decrease your descent rate. If you're high, you want to pull the power out. If you're low, you need to increase the power. And you gauge that visually. You don't even have to look at your altimeter. You can look at the runway and discern whether you're high or low. Now I'm looking at the runway here, and we look pretty on track here. Looking at final's clear. I'm going to go flaps 30, maintain 70 knots, and get ready for a 90-degree left turn for final. Now, you notice I'm pretty low here, right? And we look at our vertical speed indicator there at the bottom, and it's pretty fast descent. So I'm going to increase my RPM. We're at flaps 30, and we're low, so we're on the back side of the power curve. We're going to need a lot of power to overcome the drag that we have. So we're going to increase that power. You notice, you look at that runway, you're very low, and you know the trees are probably only 300, 500 feet below. So increase that power, push that nose over. It sounds counterintuitive, but increase the power and push the nose, keep it level, because when you increase that power, the nose is going to want to lift. Get that vertical speed close to 0. We want to get back on our preferred descent profile. Obviously, we're really low. So maintain 70 knots and keep that vertical speed as close to 0. Fly level. Look at the horizon. Fly level. Keep looking at that runway. You know, we're still low. And we don't want to, I'm going to pull the power back just a little bit here. I don't want to get too high, too fast. So I'm going to pull that power back just a little bit. And again, we're referencing our airspeed and looking at the runway. That's the two primary things we're looking at. I'm still low, and I'm about 75, 70 knots. So we want to slow down. So I'm going to keep the nose up. And there, intercept that airspeed and glide profile, get back on 70 knots. Lower the nose a little bit to resume our descent, pull the power out so that we can descend without gaining airspeed. And we're back on profile. So we're going to pitch the nose down, and we're going to keep reducing our power. As we approach the threshold here, we're going to pull the throttle to idle, and we're going to keep maintaining this pitch. We don't want to pitch up yet. As we get close to the ground, we're going to pull the nose back, and we're going to try to maintain level flight. As we slow down, the plane's going to start to sink. We counter that with pulling the nose up. Pull the nose up. There you go. Keep pulling it up, and try not to land, and there's the touchdown. So again, we're trying not to land. we're landing by trying not to land, right? So now I'm going to put the flaps up, go full power, and we're going to do another one. And this time I'm going to show what it's like if you're too high, how to correct and get back on the proper glide path. Alright, this time, as we fly downwind here for runway 32, I'm going to show you how to recover from being too high on the approach. So I'm going to purposefully leave in some extra power. I'm going to turn a little earlier and just show what it looks like to be high and how we correct for that. So again, as we have discussed, as we approach the top of descent here, beam the numbers, we're going to pull that power back, and we're going to immediately go to flaps 10. So I'm pulling the power back to about 1700 RPM, 1600, 1500 RPM, and I'm letting the nose come down. We're going to fly about 85 to 80 knots. Really want to be on 80 knots. You see I'm already at flaps 10, pitching for 80 knots. And I'm going to turn a little early because I want to be close to the runway. I want to show what it looks like to be high on approach. Okay, so we're rolling out on centerline extended. We're going to, obviously we're high and fast. My flaps are 20, so I'm high and I'm fast. We need to slow and we need to descend. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to flaps 30, and I'm going to pull my power back, pitch the nose up until I reach 70 knots, and then I'm going to pitch up. Now I'm going to descend at 70 knots, and I'm going to pull the power out pretty much to idle to increase my descent rate. Again, we're not nose diving. Look at my airspeed here. Let me zoom in on the airspeed here. We're not nose diving, right? We're flying at a stable descent rate with a stable airspeed. You see me there about 70 knots. I'm not pushing the nose down 30 degrees below the horizon. I'm just pulling the energy out of the aircraft by reducing the power to idle. Now I'm going to increase the power just a little bit, and then I'm going to pull the power back to idle as we pass the threshold, get into ground effect, transition to level, watch the end of the runway. As the energy comes out of the aircraft, it's going to want to sink, so we counter by pulling back on the stick. Keep pulling back, and touchdown. De-rotate the aircraft slowly and maintain center line. We're going to go back up one more time, do another approach. I want to really show what that sight picture looks like. Get the flaps up, and then do your better job than I did maintaining center line and get back in the air. Alright, so just to cap it off, we're going to do another standard approach. Just show what we're kind of going for a stable approach. Again, a stabilized descent is a constant airspeed, constant airspeed, and constant descent rate, sink rate, is a stable descent, of course, on center line. So I'm getting adjusted here for center line. I've got flaps completely up right now, so we're flying about 90 knots. First thing we're going to do is to begin the descent is pull the RPM back. And then as soon as you do that, as long as your airspeed is below 110 knots, you can go to flaps 10. That's going to help us slow the plane down further. We're going to aim for about 80 knots. We're going to aim for that airspeed by controlling the nose of the aircraft. We're going to pitch to maintain 80 knots. And we're going to go flaps 20 because we're below 85 knots. Now I know already, just from experience, my aiming point is short of where the runway is. It's short of the threshold. So I'm slowing down here to get below 80 knots, get back to 75. And we're going to go flaps 30. We want to slow further to 70 knots, pull that power out a little bit. Now, like I said, our aiming point seems to be right there, and we want it to be on the threshold or the numbers. Depends on where you're trying to touch down. So in order to adjust that aiming point, we have to introduce energy. We have to increase the power. And now our aiming point's about the numbers. We're going to pull that power out very slowly. Now we're going to idle as we pass the threshold. And get ready for transition. We transition into ground effect. Looking at the end of the runway, we're going to maintain level flight, and as we get slower, we're going to have to increase the angle of attack even more. So we're pitching up, keep pitching up, don't let the wheels touch, and there's touchdown. Maintain center line. Rudder is very sensitive in this game. I'm not a big fan of it, but I'm going to maintain center line and get on the brakes, and we're going to take the next left. So we're slowing down quite aggressively, really, and now we can get off on the left. So there you have it. If you're new to the genre, if you're not familiar with flying, landing can be very challenging. I remember when I first started, I was bouncing all over the place, crashing. It is something that takes time to get. You really just have to practice. Again, we don't nosedive. I think that's the biggest mistake you can make, is being too low. or being too high and trying to nosedive to get back onto the runway. It's just never going to work. So to cap it off, to control our altitude, we use the throttle, which I'm showing you here. We increase the throttle to slow our descent. We decrease the throttle to increase our descent. And then to control our airspeed, we're going to pitch, which we use the yoke, which is this right here. You pull back on the stick, which, I mean, hopefully if you follow this video, there's your elevator, by the way. If you made it this far, hopefully you've successfully landed a time or two. But if you haven't yet, you want to get those concepts down. Power for altitude, pitch for that airspeed. So a great landing starts with a stabilized approach. If you nail that approach, if you nail those airspeeds, you're going to nail that landing. And then just one more thing is that if you're flying a different aircraft than the 172, it wouldn't hurt to look up the landing speeds for the aircraft you're flying. Obviously, if you're flying an Airbus, you're not going to target 70 knots. You're going to be targeting something closer to 145 knots. Lastly, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like and subscribe button. I'm going to have some more flight simulator stuff coming here and there. Leave a comment below if you're interested in other topics, what other things you'd like to have some help with, or some other aspects of flight simulation. I'd love to do more tutorials. Otherwise, if you like aviation, this is a great channel to follow, document my journey through aviation training. That's it for today, and thank you for watching. Enjoy flying.